Christopher Card, you have been indicted on one count of healthcare fraud. Came to your practice court. The district admitted patients to get from
Everybody seven, I'm not accept for your that as a criminal.
Once is a misdiagnosis. Twice is suspicious. Christopher Card did this to 18 patients across 17 years and left a billing trail that made denial impossible.
I am a licensed optometrist, mercer of the 19 German, any George judge jury of this country. I did my job.
By the time federal investigators walked into Total Vision in Caldwell, Idaho, the spreadsheet sitting in their case file already told the story. 18 patients diagnosed with glaucoma, 10 of them children. All 18 later examined by other doctors. Only one, just one, actually had the disease. Christopher Card had been billing the federal government, the state of Idaho, and 3 private insurers for 17 years. The total loss came to $1 million. The sentence ran 36 months in federal prison, $1 million in restitution, and a $100,000 fine. The children he diagnosed will carry those false records for the rest of their lives. Before we continue, I have to ask, have you ever sat in an exam chair and trusted a doctor's diagnosis without ever questioning it? Drop a comment and tell me if you have ever asked for a second opinion. And if you are new here, subscribe. We hold trusted professionals accountable every single week on this channel. Christopher Card was born in 1952 in a small farming town in southern Idaho. His father ran a hardware and feed supply store on the main street. His mother taught 5th grade at the local elementary school. The Card family was modest, hardworking, and rooted in the Treasure Valley. Christopher was the middle of 3 children. By the time he was 9 years old, he was already sweeping the floors at his father's store on Saturday mornings for 50 cents an hour. Friends from his childhood described him as quiet, focused, and almost painfully polite. He wore wire-frame glasses from the age of 7. He told a classmate once that he hated the glasses, but loved the office where he got them. The eye doctor in town was a soft-spoken man named Dr. Lyman, who let young Christopher sit in the exam chair after appointments and look through the phoropter at the eye chart on the wall. That single childhood experience would shape the next 50 years of his life. Christopher graduated from Caldwell High School in 1970. His grades were strong in science, particularly biology, and his guidance counselor wrote in his file that he was, quote, detail-oriented, methodical, and well-suited to a profession requiring precision. He enrolled at the College of Idaho in Caldwell that fall, working part-time at the feed store on weekends to help pay tuition. He finished his undergraduate degree in 1974 and applied to the Pacific University College of Optometry in Forest Grove, Oregon. He was accepted. He moved north that summer with a single suitcase and a used Chevy Nova. For the next 4 years, he studied refraction, ocular pathology, binocular vision, and the diagnostic protocols that would later become the instruments of his fraud. His professors described him in their evaluations as reliable, technically proficient, and capable of building a successful practice. He graduated from Pacific in 1978, returned to Idaho, and took an associate position with an established optometry practice in Boise. He met his future wife, Marlene, at a Sunday potluck at a friend's home in Nampa that same year. They married 14 months later. By 1981, they had bought a modest ranch house in Caldwell. By 1984, they had 2 daughters, Brianna and Kaylee. For more than a decade, Christopher Card built a quiet, respectable reputation in the Caldwell area. He was the eye doctor who fitted local school children with their first pair of glasses. He was the man who tested farm workers for color blindness before the harvest season. He was a deacon at his church, a member of the local Rotary, and a coach for his daughter's youth basketball teams. The family lived comfortably. They were not wealthy, but they were never in want. In September of 1993, Christopher Card opened Total Vision, PA, on a quiet commercial street in Caldwell. He was 41 years old. He was the licensed optometrist, the owner, the manager, and the only care provider on the schedule. He hired a single front desk employee and a single billing clerk. He bought a phoropter, a slit lamp, an autorefractor, and a small visual field analyzer on a 5-year equipment loan. The lease on the building was $600 a month, The sign above the door said the practice was open 6 days a week. That day, the day he turned the brass key in the door of his own practice, was the day the institutional opportunity for the next 17 years of fraud came into being. To understand what Christopher Card did, you have to understand how the system he exploited actually works. A licensed optometrist in the state of Idaho has the institutional authority to do two things at once. First, the optometrist can diagnose eye conditions. Second, the optometrist can bill insurance carriers for the diagnostic testing and the treatment associated with that diagnosis. The diagnosis is the entry. The billing is the exit. The same person makes both decisions, often inside the same exam room, often within minutes of one another. The diagnostic codes for eye conditions like glaucoma trigger specific reimbursement rates. A diagnosis of primary open-angle glaucoma authorizes billing for visual field testing, intraocular pressure measurement, optic nerve imaging, follow-up visits, and the prescription of glaucoma medications. A diagnosis of chronic angle closure glaucoma triggers a slightly different set of billable procedures. A diagnosis of glaucomatous atrophy, sometimes called optic cupping, triggers another. A diagnosis of acquired color deficiency triggers another set entirely. Each diagnostic code is a doorway. Each doorway opens onto a reimbursement structure. Each reimbursement structure pays out a specific number of dollars from a specific insurance program. Idaho Medicaid, Medicare, Blue Cross of Idaho, Regents Blue Shield, the Railroad Retirement Board. The system is designed on the assumption that the licensed practitioner is acting in good faith. Here is the operationally significant feature. Licensed optometrist diagnoses are typically accepted by insurance carriers without independent verification. There is no second opinion required. There is no external diagnostic confirmation built into the standard reimbursement workflow. The carrier receives the claim, matches the diagnostic code to the procedure code, confirms the patient's eligibility, and issues payment. The diagnosis is presumed correct because the licensed practitioner certified it. That presumption is the architecture of trust that Christopher Card spent 17 years inside. He understood it. He understood that no Medicaid claim adjuster in Boise was going to send an investigator to Caldwell because a 40-year-old farm worker had been diagnosed with chronic angle closure glaucoma. He understood that no Medicare reviewer in Baltimore was going to flag a glaucoma claim simply because the patient was a teenager. He understood that as long as his per-claim dollar amount stayed reasonable, the cumulative pattern would dissolve into the background noise of routine reimbursement. And he was right. For 17 years, he was right. The fraud began quietly. Investigators would later trace it back to September of 1993, the same month Total Vision opened its doors. The early claims were small. A diagnosis of acquired color deficiency for a teenage patient whose vision was perfectly intact. A diagnosis of tension headaches for a Medicaid patient who had come in for a routine prescription update. A billing entry for the removal of a foreign object from the eye, where no such procedure had occurred. The dollar amounts were modest, $40 here, $80 there. None of them large enough to draw attention. But the pattern was already in motion. By 1995, Card had refined his method. He had identified Idaho Medicaid as his most reliable source of fraudulent revenue. Medicaid reimbursement rates were lower per claim than private insurance, but the patient volume was higher, and the per-claim review threshold was easier to slip beneath. He started building patient files in which the diagnosis on the chart did not match the patient who had walked into the exam room. A 12-year-old girl came in to have her glasses prescription updated. Card wrote in her chart, primary open-angle glaucoma, mild. He billed Idaho Medicaid for the visual field test he did not perform. He billed for the optic nerve imaging he did not perform. He billed for the follow-up visit that would be scheduled but not actually conducted. The girl went home with a slightly stronger prescription and a long shadow on her medical record she would not learn about for 15 years. The juvenile patients were the structural opportunity. Glaucoma is a disease that affects roughly 2% of adults over the age of 40. It is exceedingly rare in children. A pediatrician reviewing a child's medical file would normally flag a glaucoma diagnosis as unusual. but pediatricians do not typically review the records of their patients' eye examinations. The diagnosis would sit in the chart, generating billable follow-up encounters every year, for as long as the family kept bringing the child to total vision. And the family always kept bringing the child to total vision, because Dr. Card had told them their child had glaucoma, and glaucoma is a serious diagnosis, and serious diagnoses require careful, ongoing care. By 2000, Card had perfected the alternating diagnosis architecture. For patients he had flagged as glaucoma cases, he would alternate the specific diagnostic code from one visit to the next. Angle closure glaucoma at the spring appointment, open angle glaucoma at the fall appointment, angle closure, again, the following spring. The patient's underlying eye condition had not changed because the patient did not actually have glaucoma. But the alternation created additional billing opportunities under each diagnostic code, and it had the secondary benefit of making the claims pattern look less repetitive in any automated review. He targeted families. He targeted siblings. Investigators would later identify 10 juveniles among the 18 patients in the original federal indictment, and those 10 juveniles were drawn from a small number of families. One family had 5 siblings on Card's books, every single one diagnosed with some variant of glaucoma. Another family had 3. Another family had 2. The parents had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. The eye doctor had told them. The eye doctor was a deacon at the church. The eye doctor coached his daughter's basketball team. The eye doctor was a member of the Rotary. By the middle of the 2000s, the practice was generating tens of thousands of dollars per year in fraudulent billings. The cumulative loss to the 5 healthcare benefit programs was climbing toward the 7-figure threshold. The Card family was not extravagant. They lived in the same Caldwell house they had bought in 1981. They drove the same vehicles for 10 and 12 years at a stretch. The money was going into the practice, into equipment upgrades, into a second exam lane, into salaries for additional staff. The fraud was not financing luxury. The fraud was financing the appearance of a successful, growing small-town optometry practice. The appearance of normalcy was the camouflage, and for 17 years, it worked. The unraveling began in October of 2008 with a knock on a door in Nampa, Idaho. The woman who answered was a former front desk employee at Total Vision. She had worked at the practice from 2003 to 2006. She had left to take a billing position at a hospital. She had not maintained contact with Christopher Card or with anyone else from the practice. She had told her husband once, in a quiet moment after work, that something at Total Vision had never felt right. She had told no one else. When the 2 men on her front step introduced themselves as a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and an investigator with the Idaho Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, she did not, for a moment, know what to say. They asked if she would speak with them. She invited them in. She made coffee. She told them everything she had seen. She told them about the patient charts that had been modified after the appointment. She told them about the diagnostic codes that had appeared on billing slips that had not appeared on the exam notes. She told them about the children whose parents had been told they had glaucoma. She told them about a sibling group of 5 from a farm family south of Caldwell. She told them she had once asked the billing clerk about a discrepancy and had been told, quietly and firmly, that Dr. Card handled the diagnoses and the codes himself. The interview lasted 3 hours. Word travels in small communities. By the end of October, Christopher Card knew. He never said how he knew. He never named the person who told him. But on the first business day of November 2008, the billing patterns at Total Vision changed. The juvenile glaucoma diagnoses tapered off. The alternating angle closure to open angle pattern slowed. The acquired color deficiency claims, which had been the most disproportionate of his fraudulent categories, all but disappeared from the daily output. Card kept practicing. He kept seeing patients. He kept billing. But the volume and the composition of his claims shifted in a way that would later be visible on a graph an FBI forensic accountant would print out and slide across a conference table. He could not undo 17 years of conduct by changing his behavior in November of 2008. He could only document, in the most legible possible way, that he understood what he had been doing. That documentation would become an exhibit at his sentencing. We are about to get into how investigators put the case together and what the statistical analysis actually showed. If this story has held your attention this long, take a second to subscribe. We cover the case's mainstream coverage walks past every week, and the second half of this one is where everything you have been hearing starts to click into place. The investigation took 3 years. The Federal Bureau of Investigation Field Office in Boise and the Idaho Medicaid Fraud Control Unit assigned a joint task force to the case in late 2008. They began with the former employee's statement, but they did not build the case on that statement alone. They built it on the data. A forensic accountant pulled the complete Idaho Medicaid claims history for Total Vision from January 2004 through May 2009. She also pulled the aggregate diagnostic frequency data for every other optometry practice billing Idaho Medicaid during that same window. She built a single spreadsheet comparing Christopher Card's diagnostic output to the rest of the state. What that spreadsheet showed was operationally striking. During that 5.5-year window, Card had treated only 3.9% of Idaho's Medicaid clients, less than 4%. He was a single optometrist in a small Caldwell practice, with one exam lane operating most days and a second lane operating part-time. He was not a high-volume provider. He was not a regional referral center. He was a small-town optometrist with a modest patient list. But of all the Idaho Medicaid diagnoses of chronic angle closure glaucoma submitted during that 5.5-year window, Christopher Card had generated 86% of them. Of all the diagnoses of primary open-angle glaucoma, he had generated 52%. Of all the diagnoses of glaucomatous atrophy, 92%. Of all the diagnoses of acquired color deficiency, 99%. 99% of every acquired color deficiency diagnosis submitted to Idaho Medicaid by any optometrist in the state over a 5.5-year window had come from one small practice in Caldwell. The forensic accountant ran the numbers a second time to be sure. Then she ran them a third time. Then she printed the comparison out and walked it down the hall to the lead FBI agent on the case. The second branch of the investigation was the patient confirmation work. Investigators identified, from Card's billing records, every patient he had ever diagnosed with glaucoma or a glaucoma-related condition. The list ran into the hundreds. From that list, the task force selected 18 patients whose records showed the most clinically improbable diagnoses, with a heavy weighting toward juvenile patients and toward sibling clusters. All 18 were referred for second opinion examinations by independent ophthalmologists at the University of Utah Moran Eye Center and at St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center in Boise. The examinations took place between November of 2010 and June of 2011. The independent ophthalmologists were given no information about the prior diagnoses. They examined each patient from scratch. When the results came back, only one of the 18 had a glaucoma or glaucoma-related condition. 1. The other 17 had healthy eyes. Some had been on glaucoma medications for years. Some had been told their children would go blind without ongoing treatment. Some had spent thousands of dollars in co-pays and out-of-pocket costs over a decade. None of them had the disease. The case was now built. The statistical analysis established the pattern. The second opinions established the falsity of the diagnoses. The November 2008 billing change established consciousness of guilt. The former employee's testimony established the operational mechanism. The federal grand jury convened in Boise in late 2011. On January 10, 2012, the indictment was returned. The confrontation came at the door of his Caldwell house on a cold January morning. 2 FBI agents and 1 Idaho Medicaid Fraud Control Unit investigator. They knocked. Marlene Card answered the door. She called her husband to the front of the house. He came down the hallway in a flannel shirt and jeans, his coffee mug still in his hand. The lead agent spoke first. "Dr. Card, I am Special Agent Daniel Reinhardt with the FBI. This is Investigator Holloway with the Idaho Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. We have a federal indictment against you for executing a scheme to defraud healthcare benefit programs. We need you to come with us. Can I get dressed? Yes. Your wife can stay here. We will wait for you. He went back down the hallway. Marlene Card stood in the doorway with her arms folded across the front of her cardigan. She did not say anything to the agents. She did not say anything to her husband when he came back. He emerged in a blue button-down shirt and slacks. He kissed her on the cheek. He turned to the agents. I have a patient at 8:30 this morning. Can someone call my office and let them know I will not be in today? Sir, you will not be returning to the office. Not today, and not for some time. The drive from Caldwell to the federal courthouse in Boise was 27 minutes. Christopher Card sat in the back of the bureau vehicle and looked out the window. He was 60 years old. He had been a licensed optometrist for 34 years. He did not say another word until his attorney arrived. He never disputed the underlying facts of the case. Not at his arraignment, not at any pretrial conference, not at the change of plea hearing 7 months later. On August 16, 2012, Christopher Card pleaded guilty in the United States District Court for the District of Idaho. The plea was to a superseding information charging one count of executing a scheme to defraud healthcare benefit programs under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1347. The statutory maximum was 10 years in federal prison. The plea agreement included a $1 million restitution commitment, with the government agreeing to consider leniency at sentencing for every $250,000 Card paid into the court registry before the sentencing date. Card's attorney, Manuel Castillo of Boise, made a written motion at the change of plea hearing notifying the court that his client had liquidated a retirement account and was prepared to pay the first installment within 30 days. The sentencing hearing was held on December 11, 2012, before United States District Judge Edward J. Lodge, United States Attorney for the District of Idaho. Wendy J. Olson appeared for the government. 2 of the 18 indicted patients delivered victim impact statements. The first was the mother of 3 siblings, all of whom Card had falsely diagnosed with glaucoma when they were elementary school age. Her statement, read into the record, ran 4 minutes. I trusted him with my children. I went home and I cried because I thought my babies were going to lose their sight. I spent 6 years giving them eye drops they did not need. I spent 6 years telling them they had a disease. I spent 6 years making them sit still in his exam chair and listen to him explain what was wrong with their eyes. There was nothing wrong with their eyes. There was something wrong with him. The second victim impact statement was from a 24-year-old man who had been diagnosed by Card at the age of 9. He had grown up believing he had a degenerative eye disease. He had not joined the Marine Corps when he wanted to because he believed his vision would fail him. He had not pursued a commercial driver's license. He had spent 15 years carrying a false diagnosis that had reshaped the entire architecture of his adult life choices. Judge Lodge addressed Christopher Card directly before pronouncing sentence. Dr. Card, the offense to which you have pleaded guilty is one of the most serious breaches of medical trust I have seen in this courtroom. You held a licensed position that depended on the institutional presumption of good faith. You exploited that presumption for 17 years. You exploited it against children. You exploited it against working-class families who trusted you because you were their neighbor. The sentence I impose today must account for the duration of the conduct, for the deliberateness of the alternating diagnosis pattern, for the targeting of juvenile patients, and for the fact that you altered your conduct only when you understood you were being investigated, not because you understood you had done wrong. The sentence was 36 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release to follow, $1 million in restitution payable to the 5 healthcare benefit programs, a $100,000 fine payable to the United States. Christopher Card surrendered to the Federal Bureau of Prisons in January of 2013. He was designated to the Federal Correctional Institution at Sheridan, Oregon, a low-security facility about 300 miles northwest of Caldwell. He served the bulk of his sentence there. He was released to supervised release in late 2015. The Idaho Board of Optometry revoked his license in 2013. He never practiced again. Total Vision, PA, closed in early 2012, in the weeks following his indictment, and the building on the Commercial Street in Caldwell sat empty for 2 years before a chiropractor's office took the lease. The patients whose records carried his false diagnoses spent the next several years working with their new providers to formally amend their medical histories. Some of those records have still not been fully corrected. The 17 years it took to build the fraud took less than 3 years to take apart. But the children he diagnosed are now adults. They will carry the documentation of his work in their charts for the rest of their lives. This case was quiet, but the next case on the right-hand side of your screen is louder, faster, and the betrayal cuts deeper. Click it now.